Hey, KU fans, welcome back to the KU Sports Hour here at KUSports.com with Benton Smith and Shane Jackson. I'm Matt Tate on what can only be described as the greatest day in the history of Kansas football.
Wow.
Okay?
I know a lot of people were excited about that one Orange Bowl win, 14 years ago or whenever that was, but clearly this surpasses it, as you stated. Much
Well,
bigger deal.
Can it be greatest day in the
No,
last
that'd
13
be
years?
there you go. I mean,
Yeah.
contextually,
Might be.
maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
if you weight it, if you grade on a curve, if you will, I'm telling you what, man, this thing feels legit, and it's not necessarily, as we were talking about before we hit record here, it's not necessarily because Lance Leipold is the greatest coach ever known to man or automatically going to save the program or the hero that Kansas needed. He's just a competent, real football coach, and I think people are very excited about that. So there's the news, in case you haven't heard, and I don't know why you'd be watching this if you haven't heard, but Lance Leipold from Buffalo is KU's new football coach. That was announced early this morning. A 6-year deal. We don't have exact terms of the contract yet, but 6 years gives him time. Benton Smith, your first reaction to waking up and jumping right into a pretty big news story that will last and linger for the next few weeks for sure.
Well, I think one of the more interesting parts of this whole coaching search the past few weeks has been like he and Jeff Monken were kind of the perceived frontrunners from the start, right? I mean, as soon as Jeff Long left, and even before, Travis Goff came in, I think those two guys were two of the most prominent current head coaches that you kind of thought, well, it'd be interesting if KU were able to hire either of them. Turns out both of them wanted the job, and Leipold ended up being the guy. And I mean, I think probably the thing that KU fans should be encouraged about is like, this isn't like a glamorous type of hire. This isn't like an AD trying to make a splash with the hire. Like he went and got a football lifer who won 6 Division III national championships, and then went and turned around a struggling Buffalo program and really had them rolling. 6-1 last year, and easily could have been like a 10-2, 11-2 type of year if it was a regular season, but it was a shortened season because of the pandemic. But I mean, one of the best offenses in the nation last year, and I mean, 3 straight bowl games for Buffalo, and that program has been down for a long time, and he legitimately turned it around. I think that has to be a huge part of the appeal, because that's what you need the next head coach at KU to be able to do, and he's proven that he can do that at a place that's not glamorous, that's not easy to recruit to, and those I mean, that checks a lot of boxes, just his track record.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Shane, I want your reaction, but real quick before we get away from that point, I think it's something I wrote too. I think that's the deal here. This is a special man, because anybody who wants to be in that position like he was in Buffalo, where it's just bumpy and ugly and it's a grind and you don't know if it's going to happen, and then you get it going. For anyone to get it going and then want to go jump right back into that again. I mean, Buffalo returned almost all of its roster from last season. They could be looking at a 10-2 type of season this year, if not better. It would have been really easy for him to stay and say, "Hey, I like this. This is fun. I'm happy here. I'm enjoying the fruits of my labor. I'm comfortable. We've got it rolling. Let's keep it rolling."
Or to wait till a more
Right.
appealing job came open at the end of 2021.
Right. But here he is saying, no, this is what I do. I want to go jump into this thing again and prove myself all over again, and know that he's sort of restarting the clock. I mean, this is going to be a 2, 3, 4-year process, right? I mean, it will not happen overnight. Nobody can say it will. Nobody expects that it will. He knows that as well as anybody, but he's willing to jump right back into it. And I think there's some comfort there. I mean, I think this is a guy who's familiar with that position and comfortable in the grind. And I think that as much as anything here, as much as scheme or hirings or recruiting or anything, I think just that mindset and that been there, done that mentality, that's going to benefit Kansas the most in this process, because that's what you need. You need a guy who knows how to do it, and he does. Shane, what was your first reaction, once you got over the Lakers box score last night and kind of took a look at this thing?
Well, really, once I got over the fact that I'd watched enough triple option videos that I felt prepared to write some things about Monken's offense, and I had to get over that real quick. No, I did think it was interesting though that kind of similar to what Benton was just saying, that Leipold was obviously a front runner from start to finish here, and similar in a way that of the last coaching search where it felt like Les Miles' name was thrown out there immediately, but the difference this time I think is that it felt like Travis Goff did his homework. Monken obviously was a clear front runner. There was a bunch of names that were thrown around in the mix the entire time, and it didn't feel like he zeroed in necessarily on one candidate, even though these two were the front runners seemingly from start to finish. So I thought that was a difference in this coaching search compared to maybe the last coaching search.
Yeah,
I bet that.
Point, right?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. I mean, look, I think it's fine to identify a couple of guys or a few guys early on that you think this is probably it, but that shouldn't prevent you from knocking on other doors and making other phone calls and just kicking the tires here and there just to make sure. And so that's where the thoroughness came from, I think, in this search. I think he liked these guys before he was hired at Kansas. I mean, I think that was probably part of the idea of Travis Goff getting hired, is when he was hired, the search committee, the search firm, they said, what's your plan for football? And I don't know this, but I wouldn't be surprised if he said, well, I want to make a run at a couple of guys. Here's my top 2 choices or top 3 choices or whatever it was. I would be willing to bet that those names came up in those interviews when the AD position was being filled. And so this is a guy who knew that most likely well before he even began the search, but yet he still took his time. He still was thorough. He still talked to everybody he could imagine that might offer some quality input. And I think that's, as much as anything, as much as Lance Leipold looks like a very good hire, I think what you're seeing as sort of a secondary benefit of this is that maybe, just maybe, this Travis Goff guy is a pretty good guy to have presiding over the whole thing. I mean, this is a program and an athletic department that overnight almost feels like it's in a much, much better shape than it was 2-3 months ago. Both at the top and with regard to the football coach and what's happening there. So I think that's exactly right. And I think, people started whining a little bit this week about how it was taking so long. No, it didn't take so long at all. I mean, it was 3 weeks and boy, if you rush this kind of thing
for the job, basically.
Yeah. Right. Good point. Yeah. Not even 3 weeks since he announced the start of the search. So, man,
and what would be the difference between and what would be the difference between April 20th versus April 30th? Like, I mean, how much was another week or so really a big difference there?
Yeah, great point. And I think it's really important too that sometimes it is a big difference for candidates. Mm-hmm. They get antsy, and especially with their school, if their AD or their fan base knows they're in the mix, they get a little, it gets a little messy there. But give Leipold credit for staying patient too. I mean, he didn't try to force this thing. He didn't try to push KU. He just said, well, if I'm your guy, I'm your guy. I'll find out when the time's right. Whatever you need, I'm here. And that benefited him, and we'll see if it benefits KU, but it sure feels like it is right now. So just a lot of people handling things very professionally, being very thorough, being very patient, and just respecting the process, understanding that in order to make a good hire, a quality hire, this is the cost of doing business, right? I mean, sometimes it just takes a little bit of time, and they took the time they needed. Goff said that from day one, that he was going to take the time necessary to find the right guy, and he took every bit of the time he wanted, and they feel like they found their guy. So now's when the fun begins. But what else did you have to add, Benton? I know I cut you off at least 3 times while Shane was cutting me off.
No worries. It's hard to even we're veterans at Zoom calls by now, but it's still hard to not talk over people sometimes.
Right.
So yeah, I was just gonna say it's weird. I don't think Travis Goff took any film crew with him at any point during his coaching search, and I'm going to guess that he'll actually be able to remember the names of the candidates that he interviewed. So I think he's done a great job, obviously, with this whole process. And
no fake flight plans.
Yeah, no fake flights to Baton Rouge or any places like that. But yeah, I'm really interested. Obviously, it sounds like on Monday is when Lance Leipold's going to have his first press conference. He might actually be in Lawrence and be able to be at the spring game on Saturday before that, but he's not actually going to field questions until Monday. And I mean, I'm excited to hear what he has to say, because obviously it's a it's a pretty cool step for him in his career. And obviously it's a huge deal for this program. And it's, even though the Jags went 0-9 last year, I do think that there are some talented players in this team on this roster that, you know, this 2021 season, it's not going to blow anyone away, but I think it's going to be crucial for kind of where the program goes from here.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. I mean, imagine this guy, right? I mean, you know, again, at Buffalo, he's coming into May, spring ball's over. You let your strength coach take your team for the summer, and you get working on scouting and preparing for the season, and you know you got a good team. Overnight, you know, or over a couple of weeks anyway, he's got a whole other different job ahead of him right now. I mean, yeah, he should be here on Saturday because he should take a look at all of these players as often as he can. I mean, I would imagine there's some celebrating. I hope there is. You know, he should be enjoying this moment with his family. But at the same time, this man is watching film. He is studying numbers. He is looking at personnel. He's looking at last year's film. I mean, there's just got to be an unbelievable amount of work that he's putting in right now, so that when he gets here and when he does actually get to look at these guys and talk to these guys and work with these guys eventually, he'll have some idea. And look, I think there's plenty of time. I really do. I mean, it's not ideal to not have your head coach in place throughout spring, but these guys repped, they worked. Emmett Jones did a fabulous job making them stay together, work hard, put in some quality work. And you know, so now some of that's not necessarily lost, but it depends on how specific it was in the spring. Were they really working schemes and things like that, or were they just doing football work? And that's where it'll become important to find out. But I do think there's plenty of time for Leipold to establish, you know, what he wants to get done this season. And by the time August rolls around, which crazy, but isn't that far away all of a sudden. By the time August gets here and they get to start practicing, I mean, they'll have some work to do, but it'll be kind of cool, I think. I mean, in a sense, those practices will feel very productive because every day you're getting a little closer and a little better to becoming a Lance Leipold type team. So it's a long hill. It's a long hill. It's a steep hill. It's a tough climb that's ahead. Nobody should be excited to the point where they think they're going to win 4, 5, 6 games right away. He did that at Buffalo, but this is the Big 12. It's a different animal altogether. So patience will be key for him, for the program, for the fan base, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think everybody's going into that knowing that, right? I think people understand that now. And I think that this one, as you mentioned, Benton, it feels different. It's not glitz and glamour. It's not high profile. It's not big splash. It's a grinder. It's a guy who's willing to roll up his sleeves and coach football, which is what he loves to do. And now he's got to put the pieces together. But at least you kind of have some stability in knowing what he's about.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like the program was just put in a bad spot with the timing of all this. You know, obviously you would have loved to have, if you were going to make a coaching change, have that all taken care of and sorted out in the months before spring practices begin. So that's going to be kind of an interesting part of this to track, and I'm sure we'll have a much better idea of it, you know, as the summer goes along and preseason camp nears. Just like, you know, how different is everything going to be? You know, who does Lance Leipold keep around from the current staff? I mean, it's probably not going to be more than 1 or 2 guys at most, I would think. You would like to think that Emmett Jones would, you know, kind of be rewarded for what he's done. And
if he wants to be here, he's here.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You would like to think that would be the case, just because he's done such a good job with such a difficult situation. But, you know, are we talking completely new defensive coordinator and, you know, a change of scheme and what you're trying to do defensively going forward? How different does the offense end up looking compared to what they've been doing in the spring? There's kind of a lot that you have to navigate. And I guess the good news is you do have, you know, months of the summer to kind of learn the new playbook and that sort of thing. And players can kind of get together on their own and do what they can to maybe just acclimate themselves to any, you know, drastic change that's coming. But that might be another reason that, you know, KU fans probably shouldn't expect like a ton of, you know, early success immediately this year, because this is going to involve a transition period.
Yeah, and let's not forget that there would have been one anyway offensively, right? Because Mike DeBoer's a brand new offensive coordinator. So,
but now you might have 2.
Absolutely.
transitions in the
Absolutely.
same off season with the
Yeah.
offense.
There's
maybe
no
we'll
doubt.
see.
There's no doubt. Yeah. It's, but I think for every player or person out there who thinks, oh, that sounds miserable, I bet there's another player that says, that's exciting. Let's do it. This is what we do. I want to see what this is all about. I just put a blog up right before we hit record on this deal. I know people are worried about players leaving, and there will be some. There's no question about it. But I don't.
Not many though, right?
I don't get the feeling that it's going to fall apart. No, I really don't. I don't think. These players have anywhere to go. Frankly, I mean, I think there's plenty of talent, like you mentioned, Benton. But there aren't very many Power 5 schools out there with open spots right now. So if these guys want to leave, they're talking about going down a level, and I don't know that's that appealing to anybody. It may be to some, but if you want to play in the Big 12 and get the opportunities that you get here, just from facilities, locker room, training, obviously opponents that you play, I mean, all those things that go into college football. This is the place for you. Plus, on top of that, there's a lot of guys who have already invested a lot into trying to get this thing going again. And I don't see most of those guys or any of those guys really bailing on it just because it's a new head coach. If anything, I think they should be excited about it and say, okay, let's find out what this guy's about. Let's see how he treats us, how he is, what his philosophy is, and let's see if that jives with us. And if it does, gosh, maybe we can get going somewhere. This could be fun, So I don't think it's going to fall apart at all. But Shane, I wanted to ask you about the personnel and you wrote a little bit about his versatility, I think, at Buffalo, and maybe that could have been an important part of him standing out to Kansas and to Goff as a candidate. What did you learn about Leipold's philosophies offensively, defensively, and with scheme and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, mostly that he's willing to adapt to, whatever his team's strengths are. I mean, if you go back and listen to interviews that he's had, I mean, he talks about, last year's team where they ran the ball. The reason why they did that is because, well, they had Jarrett Patterson who's going to get drafted this weekend in the NFL as their running back, and they had a really good offense line, maybe the best offense line in the MAC. And so a couple of years ago when they had Tyree Jackson as their quarterback, they threw the ball and set a bunch of records that way. So it's just a matter of fitting to your team's strengths. And I think that is what probably was ultimately the selling point for him compared to maybe Monken as the other front runner, which makes a ton of sense. If you are kind of new and making a hire in this situation, you want to go, well, I have a little more comfort in someone who's shown the ability to be different and adjust, because there is still the adjustment to getting in the Power 5 here and trying to compete that way. So yeah, scheme wise, I haven't got really into the weeds there. Not exactly sure exactly what he's done just yet. But it just really is as simple as he seems willing to do whatever his team is best at.
Well, and let's take a quick minute here to look at this thing. I mean, if it really did come down to Leipold and Monken, how good of shape is KU in? I mean, there are a lot of people who are probably shocked that either of those guys wanted this job, and the fact that they were able to potentially choose between them, that set KU and Goff up for a really good opportunity to make a quality hire. And I think people should be ecstatic about that. We'll see what it produces. We'll see how successful he is. We'll see how this thing goes over the next couple of years or whatever. But they should be ecstatic that Goff didn't have to go out and get cute. He didn't have to get gimmicky. He didn't have to look for, this crazy trade or that weirdness. I mean, you saw people pushing all kinds of different candidates out there that would have fit that. And we've seen that in the past here. But these are just football coaches and guys that want to keep coaching football and want to prove themselves at the highest level. So a huge, huge advantage for Kansas that they had the interest that they did from those two guys and others. And that really, in my opinion, throughout the whole process, really gave you the feel that Travis Goff was going to make a good hire. I mean, unless he went totally rogue and did something crazy, which we have seen done, it just didn't feel like that was going to be him. And so you kind of felt the whole time that no matter who they end up with, it's probably going to be a pretty good football coach and somebody who's got experience, somebody who's been a head coach, and somebody who's built programs. And that's exactly what they got.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, just to circle back to kind of how we opened this, it does seem like they just made a hire that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's there's no desperation to it. There's no like, oh, we got to find somebody cheap. There's no, hey, let's get a name that people are really going to be impressed by. I mean, I'm sure there's people all over the country who's, saw across the bottom line today, Kansas hires Lance Leipold, and like the casual sports fan might not know who he is. But to me, that's like perfect.
Yes.
Because like how many people like knew who Matt Campbell was when Iowa State hired him? I mean,
Chris Kleiman at K-State.
Right, exactly. I mean, this is where this program's at, and this is the type of hire that they needed to make. And I think that, like you said, it's pretty impressive that two high quality candidates actually were that interested in this job, that where this program's obviously just been in a hole for so long. And it's pretty cool that Leipold wants to come here and try to dig the Jayhawks out of that hole.
Yeah, there's still a great deal of belief out there that if you get the right guy in here, good things can happen. And I don't know that people are going to come in here and talk about winning Big 12 titles or national titles, but nobody needs that. Nobody cares. If you do good for 10 years and you build quality and success on top of itself, then maybe those things will come every once in a while. Maybe not, but that's okay. But be competitive, recruit tough kids, hardworking kids, put the work in. I think that a lot of people out there believe that that's what you need here, and that if you can deliver that, you can find some success. Now, it may be relative. It may be a whole different standard than other programs hold themselves to. Obviously, it's not going to be Clemson or Alabama or Oklahoma or any of that yet, but nobody's asking for that. It's just got to be a quality product that is competitive. And how long have we been talking about that? It's like forever. But it is attainable now. It's within reach. And I want to read this quote from a story in the Buffalo News. I think her name's Rachel Lindsay, who did this maybe a year or two ago, right before they played in the MAC championship game. And it's a quote from Leipold, and it kind of just gives you the impression of it paints the picture anyway of this being a guy who knows exactly what he's doing and where he's doing it. This says, people talk about winning and losing, but there was no way I expected to come here to Buffalo. And we were just going to all of a sudden snap our fingers and things happen. It's humbling, sure, but it was a test. We wanted to take this test. I knew it'd be bumpy. I didn't know how much and how long. I mean, does that not describe Kansas? He knows this is going to be bumpy. He doesn't know how bumpy. He doesn't know how long those bumps are going to last, but he's been through it before. Has he done it at this level? No, but it's a test. It's another test for him, and I think it's going to be really entertaining at the very least to watch him work his way through this and build this thing. Now, having said that, I want people to really tap the brakes on being entertained like they were by Charlie Weiss or Les Miles even, or David Beatty. This dude is a no-frills kind of guy. I mean, he's not going to get up there and wow you with his energy and his words. I mean, he's going to remind people of Bill Snyder a lot more than he's going to remind people of Charlie Weiss or Les Miles, who's, out filming commercials and things like that. I mean, and that's, as Benton said, that's okay. I mean, that's perfect, actually. So, dig in, get comfortable, and wait to watch this thing unfold. We'll see what happens. It's going to be very interesting what he does with his staff, of course. I'd be pretty surprised, Benton. I'll get your reaction too, but I'd be surprised if Emmett Jones isn't a part of it. I mean, I would imagine they would extend every offer to him that makes it worth him sticking around. And in addition to him being good throughout spring and sort of galvanizing that group and keeping everybody together, he's a damn good recruiter. He's a guy you want on your staff. Exactly. Yeah. So it shouldn't be hard to look at him and say, let's keep you around as long as you're wanting to be here. And I would think the relationships that he's built with those guys the last 2 years and, of course, in the last month, I just can't see him wanting to walk away either, as long as they prove to him that they want him to be here. So I think that's a big thing to watch, and the rest of the staff as it falls in place will be big too. But it's probably going to look a lot like the Lance Leipold image. It's not going to be a bunch of names you've heard. It's going to be a bunch of football coaches who grind it out. Any final thoughts from either of you? Let's start with Shane Jackson. What are your final thoughts as we go into the weekend of a new era of Kansas football while we wait to talk to Lance Leipold on Monday?
Yeah, I just think it's important to note, I'm sure it's only a small fraction of fans, but just because Turner Gill from Buffalo didn't work out, it doesn't necessarily mean Leipold's not going to work out. This is actually the day after the first round of the NFL draft. just because all the Ohio State quarterbacks have sucked doesn't mean Justin Fields is going to suck. That's not how football tends to work. Coaching hires in general are just a crapshoot, obviously. And so this may not work out, but it would have nothing to do with Buffalo or Turner Gill. If they had done, 6 hires like Coach, Lance Leipold, then maybe one of them worked. So I think that is the only thing I would say. That would be my final thoughts.
I'm glad you did, because that needs to be said. I wrote it, but it needs to be said and said and said again, because the two are not even remotely connected. Their track records are totally different. I mean, they're not even in the same stratosphere. Lance Leipold is way more prepared to walk into this than Turner Gill was 130,000 years ago or whenever that was. So good thought. Good final thought. Way to end with the bang, man. Way to end strong. Let's listen to Benton here. What are your final thoughts, Benton, before we get out of here?
I think Shane, brought up that, Buffalo's running back Patterson is probably going to get drafted here this weekend, and I think that's probably going to make it kind of maybe a smooth transition for Lance Leipold at KU, because he's walking into a program where running back might be its most talented position and definitely its deepest position. Between Velton Gardner, Daniel Highshaw, Amari Pissick-Hickson, those guys are already on campus, and then you're bringing in Devin Neal. I mean, there's legit Big 12 talent at that position group, and maybe they will have games like they did at Buffalo last year where they only pass it 12, 15 times or whatever. You just run the ball and you run the ball, and you keep the ball out of the other team's hands, and you maybe find a way to compete by doing that. So that might be a key ingredient of what they try to do this year. Just feature those running backs, play to your strengths.
I like that. Just do what you do, man. Just make it look like you know what you're doing. That's all it is. How many times over the past umpteen years have we been able to watch a game and say, what is he doing? What is he doing? And that's been across the board, right? With different coaches and at different times and different personnel. I mean, they've just looked so undisciplined and so out of sync so many times that who cares what you do? If you run it 1,000 times or you throw it 1,000 times, just make it look like you know what you're doing, that you have a plan and you're executing something. If you do that, you're already a step ahead. I agree. That's very well said. So it's going to be very interesting for sure to watch it all play out. But it's cool that it happened around the spring game. I mean, again, not ideal. You'd rather him been here a month from now or a month ago or whatever, but it sort of gives a little celebratory feeling to this whole weekend. It's kind of the weekend of Kansas football right now. You get big news on a Friday, you get the spring game on a Saturday, and then you go to work from there. So it ought to be very interesting. I know we'll have a lot of fun covering it and tracking it, and Benton will be busy. Of course, we've all been busy. I mean, this has been a wild time in Kansas athletics. We've had an AD search. We've had a Kansas basketball roster bring in 7 new names and watch others leave. We've had a football search, and maybe things are starting to smooth out a little bit now. So Shane can get back to watching the Lakers make a run at a repeat. I don't know what I'm going to get back to, but I'll figure something out. Benton can get back to growing that beard, whatever. I mean, it's just good times. There's a lot of stuff going on, and for all of you who've been clicking and commenting and reading and paying attention and throwing out your input, we appreciate it. It's always fun to interact with you guys, and I think they got you a good one. I think Lance Leipold is a good football coach and a great hire for Kansas as of right now. So it should be fun to watch. For Shane Jackson and Benton Smith, I'm Matt Tate. Thanks for checking out this episode of the KU Sports Hour. We'll talk to you guys again real soon, probably next week after we talk to Mr. Leipold. Take care, everyone.